There are places on the map of the world where the ancient ink fades, replaced by the scrawled warnings of sailors who wish they had never set sail. In the annals of human exploration, there are monsters, and then there are the Laestrygonians, a nightmare so absolute, so towering and violent, that they did not merely hunt men. They extinguished hope. This is the story of the day the sea turned red, the day Odysseus, the crafty king of Ithaca, looked death in the face and saw that it was giant, hungry, and hurling mountains from the sky. We must sail back to the dim, uncertain twilight of the Mediterranean Bronze Age. The world is a vast, restless ocean dotted with unknown islands, each harbor a potential trap, each shoreline a possible grave. This is the era of the hero, where the boundaries between reality and the supernatural are as thin as sea mist. The gods are not distant observers, but active, capricious players, toying with mortal lives like pieces on a board. Our hero, Odysseus, is trying to return home from the sack of Troy, a war that left the ancient world scarred and smoking. He carries 12 ships, black and swift, filled with battle-hardened men who have seen the wrath of Achilles and the cunning of the wooden horse. They are the toughest survivors of a decade of war, but they are about to learn that war is a civilized business compared to the primal savagery of the wild. The fleet, weary and battered by storms, comes upon a land that looks deceptively inviting. It is the island of Telepylus, the high cliffs ruled by Antiphates, the king of the Laestrygonians. Odysseus, cautious as ever, anchors his own ship outside the harbor and sends a scouting party ahead, a small boat with his best men, including his trusted friend Eurylochus. Rowing into the calm waters of the narrow channel, they find a harbor so sheltered it seems like a Gianta-esque bowl, protected by steep cliffs that block the wind. It is a place of silence. No sheep bleat, no dogs bark. There is only the sound of the water slapping against the hull and the rustling of the wind. They beach their vessel and scramble up a jagged path, seeking inhabitants. Following a rough track worn by carts, they see a girl drawing water from Springa, a sight so ordinary, so domestic, that it feels like a blessing after the empty void of the sea. They ask her whose land this is. She does not scream. She does not run. With a face that is strangely blank, she points them toward the high hall of her father, Antiphates. It is a trap, of course. In the myths of the old world, hospitality is sacred, but here, that law has been perverted into a lure. The men climb to the stronghold, a massive structure of Cyclopean stones, rough-hewn and forbidding. Inside, they find the queen, a woman of mountainous stature who looks upon them not as guests, but as cattle. She calls for her husband, King Antiphates. When he arrives, the true horror of the Laestrygonians is revealed. He is not just a big man. He is a grotesque titan, a distortion of the human form, radiating a hunger that is ancient and cold. Without a word of greeting, the king snatches up one of Odysseus' captains. There is no ceremony, no duel. He simply tears the man apart and devours him raw, crunching bone and sinew in a brutal, primal feast. Panic, sharp and electrifying, explodes among the scouting party. They turn and flee, sprinting back down the rocky path toward the ships, screaming for their lives. But the Laestrygonians are not alone. Thousands of Thema men as tall as pine trees, wielders of massive jagged spears, pour out from the cliffs and the ravines like a landslide of flesh. They do not fight with the honor of warriors. They fight with the efficiency of butchers. Reaching the shore, the Greeks dive into their boats, hacking at the ropes, desperate to push off into the safety of the water. But the deep water, usually a protector, becomes a grave. The Laestrygonians stand upon the high cliffs and hurl massive boulders down upon the fleeing fleet. These are not stones, They are geological hammer blows. The sound is deafening, a crunch of splintered timber, the scream of bronze shearing through wood, and the sudden, violent silence of ships sinking instantly. 11 of Odysseus' S-12 ships are destroyed in moments. The sea churns with foam and blood. The giants stand on the shore, spearing men like fish from the water, dragging them thrashing onto the sand to be eaten alive. It is a massacre, a harvest of men, total and overwhelming. Only Odysseus' ship survives. He had sensed the wrongness in the air. He had kept his vessel outside the harbor, ready to flee. Now, he draws his sword. Not to fight he knows a sword is useless against a falling mountaina, but to cut the hawser and urge his rowers to a frenzy of motion. They row with the terror of demons at their backs. The giants wade into the surf, waist deep, casting spears the size of tree trunks. But they are just slow enough, just heavy enough to miss the fleeing black ship. Odysseus watches in the rear view of his memory the total annihilation of his comrades. He escapes not by strength, not by the favor of the gods, but by the razor-thin margin of panic and speed. To the ancient Greeks, the Laestrygonians represented the terror of the unknown north, a place where the sun did not shine in winter and where the laws of civilization meant nothing. They were the embodiment of the other, beings who spoke no Greek, offered no xenia or guest friendship, and recognized no humanity. This myth was a cautionary tale about the fragility of order. The Greeks believed that civilization was a small circle of light in a dark, chaotic wood. Inside the circle, there are laws, courts, and shared meals. Outside, there is only the appetite of the strong. The Laestrygonians are the nightmare of what happens when the circle is broken, when the host eats the guest, and the only law is the size of your hunger. It is a primal fear that we are not the apex predator and that to the rest of the universe, we might just be food. Though the name Laestrygonian has faded into the footnotes of classical studies, the archetype of the man-eating giant remains etched into our DNA. They are the spiritual ancestors of the ogres and trolls that haunt our fairy tales, the giants atop the beanstalks, and the titans in our fantasy epics. They remind us that there are things in this world that are too big to fight, things that can only be outrun or outwitted. They're the reason we check the closet and the reason the deep ocean still unsettles us. The terror of being hunted by a superior force is a story that survives every retelling. The fleet of Odysseus was cut to a fraction of its glory. The veteran warriors of Troy, men who had stormed walls and defied gods, were smashed to flotsam by thrown rocks. It is a humbling, terrifying realization that the greatest of warriors can be undone by brute, stupid force. But the story survives because of the one ship that escaped. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Even when faced with a race of cannibalistic giants who can sink a navy with stones, the human will to Livia to turn the rudder toward the open horizon, to row until the lungs burn, to seek home despite the certainty of death that prevails. We remember the monsters because they give the fear shape. But we remember Odysseus because he keeps sailing,